Okay, look. I swear that this movie fits the Wholesome Halloween Marathon theme. I swear that it is, at its heart, a hopeful, optimistic, and kind of sweet film. I swear it. That said, I will concede that it is also supremely f***ed up. I suppose after that content warning, I should probably justify this, right? So, look, I realise that this one's a little bit intense, and I did think for a while as to whether to include it or not. Granted, I do have stuff that I've already covered and stuff to come that does have its fair share of delving into dark, disturbing, or strong themes. But normally, throughout all the other films on this marathon, that's at least done through the eyes of some kind of mainstream lens. You know, It, for example, might delve into some intense stuff, but it's fantastical and does so in a way that still allows it to be a bit of a blockbuster event. It's got that crisp, high-budget cleanness to it. In all the other films I cover this marathon, whenever they do delve into heavy and intense themes, they tend to at least cover it with a degree of mainstream acceptability. People Under the Stairs, though, and I'm not exactly sure how to articulate what I mean by this, but I'll try my best. It's like proper deep horror, if that makes any sense. It's the kind of thing you probably might only know if you're not versed in the genre from sideways glances at the cult sections in HMV and CEX. It's the kind that, while technically a commercial success, most people probably haven't heard of. The kind that is low budget, the kind that's sort of weird and fucked up, the kind that doesn't feel very studio, if that gives any clarity as to what I'm trying to say here. Honestly, the best articulation I can give as to what I'm actually trying to get at here is that it's the kind of film that gets put on the Arrow Video line of Blu-rays. And if you know that distribution line and you know the kind of things they publish and their back catalogue, then I think you'll know exactly what I mean. So just how fucked up is The People Under the Stairs? Well, don't get me wrong, by the standards this genre can go to, it is not even close to being on the nastiest or most intense side of the spectrum. But by the standards set by this marathon that's mostly made with newcomers in mind, this film has its fair share of fucky. For example, heavily implied incest is just kind of a minor cliff note in this thing's plot. I guess the filmmakers were just like, well, we already got the cannibal children living in the basement, might as well throw some incest in there. You're probably wondering what this film's about now, right? Okay, so the film follows a young lad called Poindexter, nicknamed Fool by friends and family, living in a shitty little ghetto with his sister and his terminally ill mother who is dying of treatable cancer but unable to afford the operations that could save her life. Fool is also facing eviction. The landlords have decided, since Fool's mother is a few days late on her payment, that she has to pay triple rent or be thrown out on the streets. Wholesome Halloween. Without the money to cover their shitty degrading apartment, it looks like the family has no options. That is until Leroy, a friend of the family, offers Fool a potential way to save his home. Leroy's been tipped off that a family they can burgle is keeping some extremely valuable gold coins that if him, Fool, and a third accomplice can get a hold of, would give Fool enough money to not only keep his home, but also pay for his mother's operation. And the best part is, the people they'd be robbing are the shitty greedy landlords that are threatening to throw Fool out in the first place. With no other options, Fool agrees to help out, acting as a scout to look for ways inside. During the break-in, things start to go really wrong though for the would-be thieves. One of the burglars is killed, and Fool finds a huge crowd of almost feral, pale children locked in a dungeon in the basement, because it turns out his landlords aren't just greedy, but are in fact gross, evil creeps who kidnap children in order to try and make the perfect little nuclear family, but when those children break the rules or talk back to them, they throw the kids into the dark basement, leaving them to revert to cannibalism just to survive. Credited only as the man and the woman, or as they call each other, mommy and daddy. Don't like that. These two horrid little caricatures of American conservatism also have a daughter, Alice, who has survived being thrown into the dungeon by being completely obedient in every way and just accepted this hellish life because it's better than the alternative of eating her siblings and the remains of her parents' victims in the darkness beneath the house. Alice and Fool form a friendship based around their mutual need to survive this horrible ordeal. Also, they have some aid from Alice's friend Roach, a kid hunted by Daddy who also lived in the home, who talked back to Mommy and Daddy one day, so they cut his tongue out, but he escaped into the walls before he could be thrown into the basement. Though unfortunately, he couldn't escape the house altogether due to the man and the woman having every exit locked at all times, making the house some kind of elaborate prison for all inside of it. Oh, and Daddy also likes to wear a gimp suit when he hunts the child in his walls, because that's just his thing, I guess. This film is something. Gory, unsettling, creepy horror with deeply disturbing concepts executed brilliantly by writer, director, and horror legend Wes Craven. But more than just that, this film is a deep, biting satire and commentary on class division and capitalism. The man and the woman are clearly a facsimile of Ronald and Nancy Reagan, right down to the guy's slicked back hair and the fact he calls the woman mommy, which was totally a thing that Ronald Reagan called his own wife. If I have to be aware of that fact, so do you. You can thank Mr. Fortslime for giving us the knowledge on that one. As upper-class wealth hoarders, they are also the biggest threat to all of the minority characters featured in this movie. And that's even before you get to their creepy murdering habits. Their disgusting pricing practices of increasing rent while also letting the homes they own rot and decay into unlivable hellholes, forcing these members of the community out of the neighborhood so that they can improve the area, that's called gentrification. They are leeches on their society, profiteering off of shitty circumstances they themselves create. By owning most of the neighborhood, they offer the people of the ghetto they own no alternatives, and it's noteworthy that it's mentioned prior to this they ran a funeral home, selling cheap coffins at expensive prices. Seemingly with this family, even death was an opportunity to make easy money off the suffering of others. It's interesting as well that due to their inherent affluence and whiteness, these are both incredibly trusted members of the community within their neighborhood. In two separate encounters with the police, this creepy couple both come out the other end smelling of roses and being warned of the dangers of other, less upper class members of the community. The clear divide in lifestyles between the American upper middle classes and the working class minorities living in the ghettos these people own is a huge focus in pretty much every single frame. And weirdly, this is where the quote-unquote wholesome aspect of the film comes in. This movie is a powerful statement on the unity of working class people being the one thing that can fight back against these guys. The kids in the basement are seen as this terrible, horrifying threat at first, but they're just victims of the same circumstances and systems that keep the fool and his family in their dire straits. And it's only in realizing this that the two groups, the basement kids and our protagonists, can have any chance of survival or escape. The friendship between Fool, Alice, and Roach, three victims of extreme circumstances helping each other out of the hellhole others have created for them, is really quite special. At one point, Fool even actually escapes from the house completely, but goes back for Alice, who didn't make it out, knowing how dangerous it is. And ultimately, the film's closing sentiment is on the power of community as a whole. I don't want to spoil it for those who are interested, but this film has an incredibly satisfying ending, one that sees all of the separate underclasses abused by the systems the man and the woman put in place get an ending they deserve. And it's this ending that ultimately made it make the marathon. I mentioned in my Train to Busan and It videos that with Wholesome Halloween, one thing I wanted to get across with the marathon is how even the heavier end of the horror spectrum often has more to say than just let's watch people die for approximately 90 minutes. So I like to think of this video as the next evolution of that point. While those movies could be gory, scary, and intense, they never quite went to the depraved levels of incest families keeping feral kidnapped children in a dirty, dank basement and feeding them the carcasses of intruders and each other. That's
That's a slightly different level there, isn't it?
But I guess the point I want to make with this film's inclusion then is that even those films that step over these mainstream boundaries and are far more extreme than your accessible horror blockbuster still have the capacity to be just as hopeful and optimistic. The kind of film you could possibly write off as nothing more than gross out twisted trash for niche gorehound collectors might not be as focused on its violence as you think it is. Yeah, People Under the Stairs has some pretty depraved shit in it, including the murder of a dog, which I should probably warn everybody about because I know that upsets a lot of people. But that's not its point. It doesn't want to linger on this depravity. Instead, it wants to address systemic issues while preaching to the power of community. And that's awesome. I'm telling you, man, wholesome horror, it's a thing. I've made up that subgenre label now and I'm sticking to it. So yeah, great intense atmosphere and plot, dark subject matter admittedly, but shot through a lens of hope and optimism. If you think you can stomach it, I do recommend you check it out. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Wholesome Halloween. So please don't forget to hit the red button below to subscribe to my OnlyDans, like, comment, and all that jazz, and I will see you tomorrow.